for joining for another This Week This Morning. Today we are talking about agent sites. So if you're not familiar, this is a website that is kind of pre-created for you or created automatically for you through Platform. So I want to show you kind of the ins and outs of that and then get into some more specific details. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you guys is how to access your agent site from the front end. So think about this as we're pretending we're clients right now and finding your website organically. Okay, so this is not typically how I think you would access it. This is how clients are going to get to it. And we're going to use the most lovely Megan Sullivan as our demo here. I didn't prep you for that, Meg, sorry. So I'm going to search for Megan on our website. And the first thing that's going to pop up is Megan's bio page. So this is not her website. This was just her bio on our website, but it does have a lot of things. It's going to have, her bio. People can review and refer her, check out her social media links, listings, client reviews, that kind of stuff. Okay, but when you hit visit my site, this is what's going to take Megan to her actual website. And if you ever wanted to grab, I know you can't see it based on how Google does their screen sharing, but if you wanted to grab the URL, it's just going to be atproperties.com/site/your name. So it's really easy, great to put on business cards or whatever. So I'm showing you the front end. We're going to go into the back end in a second, but this is what this front page looks like. There's a couple different options here. Megan has this video of Indianapolis playing. I'll show you what the different cover options are once we get there. As we scroll down, this is going to be Megan's short bio, and you can click in and read her full bio. This is a great place for people if they want to review her. They can submit reviews here. You're going to see Megan's gorgeous listing on Nowland. There are client reviews that pop in here, and then a contact situation. So remember, this is all pulling from that profile section that I have you guys fill out as you're onboarding with us. All of those, the reviews and the bio and the headshot and all that kind of stuff, it's going to pull directly from that. I do want to point out, if you hit on this little hamburger menu over here, it does split these sections out, and it does give them more detail. So if I hit on the About Me, that's going to go ahead and pull up Megan's full bio. It'll pull up her highlights, which are just chef's kiss, by the way. If you didn't know, we have a really cool and very interesting managing broker. So, okay, there's clients, reviews, and connect. So, okay, so it's a pretty cut and dry website. I want to show you how to access it on the back end. Okay, so if you are wanting to get in there and edit anything, this is how you're going to do it. So I'm on Platform here, and I'm going to hit on my name or headshot. And I usually have you guys go to this profile section, but what you're actually going to do this time is go to agent site. So when I hit on agent site, I'm going to have a couple different options here. Number one, here's my banner image. So Megan had that video of Indianapolis playing. You guys can go through and choose what you want. Every region should have pictures associated with their region. Now, Evansville, as I was prepping for this yesterday, I realized that we didn't have any Evansville images in here. So I got that fixed. So you should see those update probably in the next day or so. But you guys should all have region specific pictures in here, as well as just some stock photos that you can choose too. I'm going to click over to page settings. This is going to be where you can change that those page names. I'm going to flip over to the actual website again so you can see this. Okay, so on the actual website, these, you can change those. So rather than saying like about me, you can say, why would you hire the best agent in Lafayette? Or, something cheesy like that. So you can go through and change those different titles and descriptions. And then this last thing here is you can build out additional pages on your agent site. We've had a couple of agents take advantage of this. I think this is going to be where I'm not a coder, I'm not a computer programmer, but you will need someone's help to do this, I'm guessing, because many of us are not coders. It is like a blank page. So I haven't played around with this at all yet, but I think this also could be a good place to like mess around with AI. Me and AI are best buds at this point. So you could also just like pop into ChatGPT and say like, hey, can you write me a page and include these pictures and this design and all that kind of stuff. So think about that. Okay, that's what I wanted to go over agent site wise, but I also wanted to take a quick moment and share, like, maybe some of you are looking at this and you're like, you know what, that's just not what I need or what I want in terms of a website for myself. But I really want to be able to link my website where people can easily access it. So for instance, if you're on our website and you're on Megan's just regular bio page, if you want this not to go to your agent site, you just maybe want it to go to a website you've created via Squarespace or wherever you want to build, you can change out where this link goes. So sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of flipping around here. If you wanted to change where that link goes, you wanted to build out your own complete from scratch website, you're going to go hit on your name or your profile, and you're going to hit on this profile section. And in this overview tab, if you scroll down under this web and social section, if you put in a different link here for personal website, that is going to change out the link on your bio on our website. So feel free to put in whatever you want to here. It's going to auto default to your agent site. But if you ever wanted to change that, you can just update that link here. Okay, that is my little tutorial for you today. I'm going to hand it over to Miss Megan Sullivan.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, my website is probably not the best example. It's pretty basic, but that's great. I think it's such a cool tool we have. I just want to take a minute today, first of all, to say congrats. Y'all are signing a lot of contracts right now. I know, because I see them coming through my inbox. So exciting to see the activity really picking up for a lot of you. But that said, it also kind of is going to prompt my quarterly reminder on some best practices with your contracts, specifically as it relates to buyer agency and listing contracts, I guess, but mostly buyer agency stuff. The first thing I just want to tell everyone and remind you of is that you should be using the @properties buyer tenant exclusive agency contract for all buyers and tenants. And you should be using the @properties listing contract for any residential up to 4 units. So I don't know what's happening, but in the last few weeks, I've seen a lot more IAR forms slipping through. And I'm going ahead and signing them because in most cases, your buyer or your sellers have already signed them. But just a reminder, as you're setting those up, you should see that @properties logo at the top of those contracts to make sure you're on the right form. If by chance you have a buyer or a seller who has already signed an IAR form, that's okay, but you will need to go back and get that @properties policy on agency signed by them. And obviously we'd like that signed as early as possible in the transaction. So if you can take a minute and go back through your files and see if you're missing any of those, we will be looking for those when you submit those files to get paid. So I would go ahead and proactively do that now. Obviously, it's important that we're getting that policy on agency and especially that affiliated business disclosure in front of people early in the transaction, not after the fact when you're trying to get paid. And on those contracts too, you will see the date at the bottom on our contracts. They do say 2025, just to make sure you're on the most current version. If you're not finding these in your DocuSign account or having any trouble, please reach out. Jocelyn will hopefully not kill me for saying this, but she's the best person to go to make sure those forms are where you can find them. So if you can't find them, please give Jesselyn a call and get those sorted. Just a couple reminders as it relates to commission. So your buyer agency commission should not be a range. It needs to be a specific number. So this is based on the terms that were outlined in the NAR settlement, that it has to be, I can't remember the big long words exactly, but basically a clear and distinguishable number. So you can't say things like, my commission will be 3% unless the seller will only pay 2.5%, and then it will be 2.5%. Or my commission will be between 2.5% and 3%. It needs to just be a number. So pick your number. We would recommend that you start with the bigger number, because I know we've talked about this before. That number shouldn't be going up after you've contracted that number with a buyer. So, for example, I know this has come up a couple times lately with new construction. I can't remember who it is that's out there paying 4% right now, but somebody is. If you have a contract for 3%, it's a little sketch to go back and then ask that buyer to amend that up to 4%. And I think the way I think about this is, if you have an attorney that you work with or a CPA you work with, and you've signed an agreement to pay them an amount, how would you feel if they came back and said, oh, by the way, my price has gone up even though we had a contract? So aim for the bigger number to start. And that said, if you're amending it down, I know we've talked about this, but we would recommend that you amend commission down based on a specific property. So you can use our limited scope addendum to do that, which basically says, hey, if this buyer buys 230 East 16th Street, my commission will be 2.5%. And then in the event that that transaction does not get to the closing table, you have not unilaterally amended your commission down, because then that would be awkward. Again, you shouldn't be going back up. So you can change it down, lower it for just one specific property, and that would be our recommendation. You can use our limited scope addendum for that, or if you're making other changes to the contract at the same time, you can use the IAR amendment. But we would just recommend that you make that language property specific. So what I'm seeing is a lot of, okay, buyer broker commission to be 2.5%. And then again, if it falls through, you're kind of stuck. So hopefully that's making sense. And then one last reminder, Jesselyn will thank me for this one. Whatever is on your listing contract or your buyer agency contract needs to line up with what you're getting paid at closing. She is checking those, and she will be asking for amendments to modify your buyer agency contract and listing contract to match what you're receiving on the settlement statement. And so the quickest way to keep your commission checks coming in as efficiently as possible is to have those amendments all in place when you submit the file to be paid. So obviously, it's a super busy time for our accounting department, trying to make this as easy for them as possible. So be double checking. If you've lowered commission, if your commission is different than what the original contract said, we are looking for an amendment to reflect that in your closing paperwork. So that's my not very exciting reminder about those contracts. If you have questions, please reach out. Happy to help navigate those conversations with buyers and sellers if needed. Yeah, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. That's all I've got, Mark.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. Echoing what Megan said, great work on all the contracts that are getting signed, both listing and purchase. It is the first week of April. We do normally anticipate a big uptick in activity this time of year. But yeah, really great activity across the board. So awesome work. Okay, I'm going to hit on two things today. Probably moving through the first one relatively quickly, which I've mentioned before, which is the rental cap proposal currently kind of being debated in the city of Fishers. I think it's kind of this interesting test case of some sort in terms of real estate philosophy, but I'm particularly going to hit on it because MIBOR released a statement in opposition to the proposal. And so I thought we'd chat about that for a minute, but I'm probably then going to spend more time on the news from NAR that I mentioned last week regarding the multiple listing options for sellers announcement and some clarifications that they've made since then and what that looks like in the two MLSs that we work in. So I think we'll spend more time on that. But real quick, this Fisher's proposal. So this was, and this might be news to some of you. I mentioned it very briefly on a Wednesday morning call previously. But now it's about a month ago, the city of Fishers came out with this proposal that would cap rental property neighborhood by neighborhood to 10%, meaning they would, I think, to enforce this rule, they would have to define neighborhood boundaries, which in most cases in Fishers are fairly clear. But they would define neighborhood boundaries, and then they would say the city is enforcing that only 10% of the homes in that neighborhood could be rental properties. It's a really interesting proposal, and it's one, occasionally stuff like this hits the national news where a municipality, which is, a relatively small one, right? Fishers, I mean, it's a good sized town, but in terms of like a municipality, it's not like a major city doing this. Jumping in and, depending on your perspective, either seeking to protect potential homeowners, that's the argument that Fishers is making, is that if we ensure 90% of the homes in Fishers are owner occupied, in theory, that makes homeownership a bit more accessible for the wannabe first-time homeowner. If you have the other perspective of this, it's a municipality stepping in and limiting the property rights of homeowners in those neighborhoods. And the strongest opposition to this, and this is really where MIBOR came in. And later, I won't share the screen here to take a look at this, but I'm going to send out the Wish TV article that kind of announced this and goes over what the proposal is. And then I'll send out MIBOR's public policy statement and why MIBOR came out. And I think it's an interesting example of, the things that a trade organization, either, MIBOR, Southern Indiana Board of Realtors, Lafayette Board of Realtors, Indiana Board of Realtors, National Association of Realtors, I think we get so focused on the things that they do, like providing an MLS, arbitration of commission disputes, code of ethics enforcement, and training. Those are all things that those trade organizations are involved in. Perhaps the accumulation of data, like we've been talking about with IAR. And I'm not suggesting that everyone on the call does or should agree with MIBOR's position on this. I think there's very reasonable arguments for both, but I think this is a really interesting example of your local trade organization and the resources that they dedicate to this, which are from you, right? These are your dues, that MIBOR has a governmental policy staff person. They have a data staff person. And I think they wrote a very well thought through opposition to this in defense of property rights and the ability of an owner. So where this really gets tricky is if the highest and best use, you remember this from your real estate license class, highest and best use is defined as what will the market pay the most for a piece of real estate regarding intended use. So in some cases, highest and best use might be an investor buying the property as a rental. In other cases, it might be a homeowner. The kind of free market economists would say the best position of a seller is to be able to take a home to market and not be restricted on what type of buyer they sell it to. Because if an investor would pay them more than a homeowner, that the property rights of the seller should be protected and they should have the right to sell it to an investor. Particularly, here's the tricky part, and this is, I think, where MIBOR is really coming from, particularly if that was the case when they bought it. There'd be this, like, my take on this is there'd be this impossible, like, transition process where you had people buying homes under conditions that had then changed, potentially to the detriment of the value of their home. And our trade organization does have local, state, and national level. Kind of an interesting side note to this. I once attended a NAR conference in, this was probably, might have been 10 years ago, something like 10 years ago. And I attended a seminar. There's a particular organization that exists in the United States that exists to protect property rights of individual homeowners against local municipalities. So, and this is one of the entities that your NAR dues fund. They exist to provide legal services if a municipality was attempting to declare eminent domain and take over an individual's home. It's a realm that's probably not super relevant to most of us most of the time, this property rights legal realm. But number one, in this particular case, I think it's relevant to a lot of you because it's in Fishers. Number two, I just thought it was an interesting example of MIBOR engaging in a public way. Interesting, MIBOR actually has a very good relationship with the mayor of Fishers. I've attended a MIBOR event that the mayor of Fishers spoke at. Like, I'm curious as to what that's like now, but I thought that was just kind of relevant of like, oh yeah, good reminder of some things that your trade org does that maybe don't always get day-to-day notice. So I'd love your thoughts. It's funny, as I was Googling this, I came across a LinkedIn post that one of you made about this issue, which I thought was fascinating. It was on the top page of search results as I was looking at this morning. But yeah, I think if that's a marketplace where you do business or you have some of your network, this could be one of those things. If you're looking for value add, relevant topics to reach out to your database to reinforce this idea that you're an expert in real estate and that you exist to add value to them, it might be a good time to create a farm in your database for everybody that has a Fishers address and create something to reach out to them, not to try to argue a position, but just say, hey, I'm kind of curious. Have you followed this? It's something my trade org has been paying attention to. What are your thoughts? Really good outreach where it's addressing something that likely matters a lot to them. I've had a friend of mine that lives in Fishers who's actually kind of involved in political advocacy as his career. He and I have been talking about this issue for several weeks now, fairly often, actually. As a friend of mine that I represented to build a house in Fishers like probably 10 or 12 years ago. Okay. I'm going to move on from that. If we have time, I might circle back to questions, but I want to have time for this NAR thing. So reminder here, this is now from last week. The National Association of Realtors last year had acknowledged that there was a lot of pressure on Clear Cooperation. So Clear Cooperation dates, it's now been in place for, I think, a little over 5 years. The design of the rule is to create a marketplace where brokers essentially have to make their listings public. That's the shortest explanation. Like, they have to put them in the MLS. They have to be accessible to everybody. It was argued to be primarily about pro-consumer, with a kind of a secondary argument of like it levels the playing field between realtors. Good debates as to whether it does either of those things, but it's been in the news a lot in the last year, particularly post-settlement. Once the news kind of moved on from the settlement, industry gossip and debates have pretty much focused in on Clear Cooperation. NAR indicated they were maybe going to make a change to Clear Cooperation and then said, actually, we need to spend more time researching this. And so they did. They did a bunch of surveys. I think they tried to engage with the larger MLSs around the country. Last week, they announced the results of this, which for many people were kind of like a non-result. What they basically said was, hey, Clear Cooperation needs to stay. And previously, we have given you one exception to Clear Cooperation. So up until now, the one exception to Clear Cooperation is an office exclusive. So the rule from the National Association that is up to MLSs to enforce is you have to put a property in the MLS. If you have a listing contract, if you're going to represent a seller, it goes into the MLS and you essentially line up. Like when it goes active, anybody can see it, but showings can't happen before then. Off-market deals can't happen unless you and your seller agree to sign a listing contract that allows you to market the property only to realtors in your company. No public-facing marketing, no syndication, and that listing needs to be entered into the MLS as an office exclusive so that there's a record of it. But you would, like, if an agent at a different company has an office exclusive, we can't see it in the MLS. The MLS could see it on the back end. Okay, so that's where we were. What was announced last week is that NAR said, okay, we're going to give you a second exception to the rule. And they called the announcement multiple listing options for sellers. Because I think the main pushback on Clear Cooperation was that the rule takes away an option for a seller that they might choose to say, I want my realtor to market my property in this way. More private, more quiet, more directed. I don't want to get my house ready. Like I want to do an easy deal. I want to show it one time. And then a seller has the legal right to do that. And that this national rule just took that out of the hands of a seller and listing broker. So that's why they're calling this multiple listing options for sellers. So the second exception is a delayed marketing listing exemption. So this adds on to office exclusive. And a lot of MLSs viewed this as a little bit of a non-announcement because most MLSs in the country were already doing something very similar to this. So in IRMLS, this is listing coming soon status. In MyBoard BLC, it's pre-market. And so I'm not aware of an MLS that was using the specific term that NAR announced, the delayed marketing listing. But the premise already existed in most MLSs, including
Hey,
the
Mark.
two that we work in. Yeah.
I think on IRMLS, the coming soons did get syndicated out on Zillow, Realtor, all that. And it's my understanding that the difference is with this new, whatever it is, it would go into in IRMLS, it would go in and all the brokers could see it, even the ones outside your office, but they'd click that button. So it does not syndicate out to the other websites, I think.
You're correct, Stacey. So there's actually, I'm going to give you three variables.
Okay.
You're referencing one of the three. There's three things that while MLSs have similar terms and the premise of this status might have some things in common, there's three things that MLSs have not been doing exactly the same thing on these pre-market coming soon listings. One of them is whether they syndicate. So syndicate means I enter a listing into the MLS, it shows up on FC Tucker's website and Zillow. That's syndication, not just on my website. It's pushed out to third parties. That's number one. Number two, can you show the property? Are you allowed to accommodate a showing without setting the listing active? Number 3 is days on market. If you set the property live and you had it in some sort of pre-market for 30 days, let's say, when you set the property live, is that day 31 or is it day 1? MLSs have been doing different things on all 3 of those. There's actually one other that I don't think this is very common, but there's a 4th one that I haven't heard talked about a ton, but it's whether or not you have to price the property. For example, the Chicago MLS, MRED, they have a private listing database that kind of accomplishes some of this where you don't even have to price it. You can float it out there and let people bring you offers. So definitely not syndicating there. But so there's MLSs have treated this differently. Where it stands now is that NAR has provided clear direction on 2 of those 3. This delayed marketing listing exemption. So NAR, they're acknowledging we don't actually enforce these rules. It's MLSs that have to enforce these rules. But if it's a realtor controlled MLS, which both of ours are, NAR can dictate the rule and say to an MLS, you have to now go determine in your market how you apply this. So our 2 MLSs are likely not going to apply this in exactly the same way, but NAR has, and I'm going to send out their announcement and their frequently asked questions. If you wanted to read through the FAQs, I think that's a good resource. They've provided clarity on 2 of those 3 variables. Number 1, this exemption, the listing cannot be syndicated. So it could only show up on the listing broker's website. They're allowed to put it on their website. It would not show up on the example I used earlier. If I listed a property, it would not show up on FC Tucker's website. It would not show up on Zillow. Side note, bad news for Zillow. They do not like this new rule. Number 2, they've clarified that an MLS is not allowed to prevent a showing on that property. It was not in the original announcement. It is in the FAQs that NAR has stated this new policy would mean, for example, those of you that are in MIBOR, you probably are aware that right now, if you have a pre-market listing, you're not allowed to show it. You can't show it. You can't let another agent show it. If you do, you have to set it live, therefore making it accessible to everybody. This rule change says it's up to the listing broker and the seller. They could set the coming soon or pre-market listing as not available for showing. If they're not trying to show it, they just want to get some buzz going before they go live on Thursday, that's fine. But if they're open to showings and getting an offer, that the MLS cannot prevent them from doing that. So that's a big change. The third variable, NAR has said, we're going to leave it up to the MLS, which is days on market. And I think that's where this really is going to be differentiated MLS to MLS and probably define how often this status is used. There's lots of variables here, but I'm predicting that if an MLS were to decide that days on market won't count during this status, I think this status is going to get used a lot. And I think that's really good news because it will remove some of the issues that have been created with office exclusives. Like they're just, I don't love the outcomes of office exclusive. And this isn't really good or bad for us as a company. It's pretty neutral for us because we're not massive and we're not small, right? Like we're a pretty good sized company. We have decent market share in our 3 markets. And so an office exclusive is probably neutral to us. But for example, Compass, largest brokerage in the US, not working in Evansville and Lafayette. In Indianapolis, they're number 3 market share, but they're number 1 market share in a lot of markets around the country. They kind of love the office exclusive model, right? it allows them a competitive advantage. And I think the rules, if the rules create winners and losers between brokerages, that's not a great outcome for a rule. And I think NAR has recognized that. So I'm hopeful. We'll see. If days on market don't end up counting in this status, I think the status will get used a lot, which is, in my opinion, good for the marketplace, because I think it will replace the office exclusive model, because it lets an agent do the same thing, but now they could expose the property to any realtor. It doesn't have to just be people in their own company. We'll see where that lands. I think there's really good arguments to every angle of this. I think there's it's a bit of a tough perspective. Like, for brokerages, you could make an argument that office exclusive is friendly to brokerages, but to the big ones. I think to the industry, you could make an argument that NAR's new model, this delayed marketing listing exemption, is beneficial to the professionals in the industry. It's creating a database of homes that a buyer pretty much has to be working with a realtor to access. That's good news for realtors. I think there's a very reasonable argument that that's not good for buyers as consumers. The flip side of that is that the current rules aren't good for sellers as consumers, because it removes an option that is legal for them if they work with a realtor. So good debate. One of the purposes of these Wednesday morning calls is for a minute, maybe just for me to try to get your brain kind of in the weeds on the industry debate and conversation. I think it's great if by 10 a.m. you've given all the energy to this you're going to give it, and you go back to your day-to-day and do your job. I don't think it's worth a whole lot of energy, but I like the idea of people just being a little bit more in tune to it as these things happen. The rule is in effect now, but NAR has given MLSs until September to enforce this. So it might actually be a while before MyBoard BLC or IRMLS decide, for example, the days on market question, or before they change, like in MyBoard, the fact that you can't show a pre-market listing currently, you still cannot show a pre-market listing. NAR has announced this, but they've given MyBoard until September to change their rules to align with the new policy. So this could be a while. Jenny just asked a question about ZenList. One kind of interesting side note about this. Let's just pretend for a moment. I used FC Tucker as an example earlier because they're number one market share in 2 of our 3 markets. If they listed a property that was in this delayed marketing listing exemption, so pre-market in MyBoard, listing coming soon in IRMLS, you have the ability to get into the MLS, see that property. You have to search in a unique way and email it to your buyer and say, oh, this one matches. It's not hitting your automated search because it's not live yet, but it matches. And once the rules change, you could go show it to them. There is a clarification in this new rule from NAR that an MLS ought to provide what's called the IDX feed to a brokerage, so that if they have an automated tool like ZenList, which we hope ZenList makes themselves available in the near future to IRMLS, but those that are working in MyBoard BLC, ZenList is available, that pre-market listing could actually go into a ZenList feed. So your buyer would not be able to see the property on MyBoard's website, on any website other than the listing brokerage, would not be on Zillow, would not hit an automated search. But because ZenList is password protected and in the context of an agreement between you and a buyer, it is actually allowed to go into that feed. So hopefully there will be a vehicle for you to automate the ability of your buyers to be able to see an off-market property and therefore increase the value that you are to them, right? Because that's a property they could not have seen on Zillow. You could see why Zillow doesn't like this move, is that this could, if it kind of caught traction, it could reduce what sometimes feels like a bit of a stranglehold that Zillow has on the internet consumer in our industry. If it became known that there were a decent number of properties in most marketplaces that were not showing up on Zillow, it'd be really interesting to see what happens with that. To me, that's kind of this like, that's kind of interesting. It's not, I'm not a like, we should seek the destruction of Zillow broker. I think that's more of just an incidental, let's see what happens kind of industry curiosity. Okay, I'm going to try to jump into the chat and see if I could address anything that is there. Oh, yeah, Stacy. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. The Fishers proposal currently, I don't believe there's any distinction between what type of investor it is that's buying. Like it's just purely rental owner occupied. Some of the local landlords have actually pointed out what you're saying, which is, hey, I don't think, like, for example, a lot of local landlords and Fishers are the people that used to live in the home. Not uncommon. We've all had clients do this. They buy their first house, and when they move, they don't sell it because they want to rent it out and begin investing in real estate. Well, this could prevent them from being able to do that. You make a good distinction. That's not quite the same thing as BlackRock, the multi-billion-dollar hedge fund buying a bunch of single-family homes in Fishers. Kristen, great question. This is what I actually, I'll just express what I like in my dream world. If somebody let me set the rules in Fishers, what I would suggest the city of Fishers do is they could make it very simple for a neighborhood HOA to limit their own rental percentages. So it's not the municipality at a bigger level dictating to an HOA, but it's at a more local level, an HOA saying, we have our own process of governance. We could change the rules in our neighborhood. I think if the city could make it very straightforward and provide support for an HOA that wanted to do that, that's a better model to me, because I think it gives the individual homeowner, like, you may not always like what your HOA does, but your agency, your involvement in that is a lot more significant. John, y'all probably read John's comment. I don't think there was a question in there, but John was self-admitted rant on eminent domain. Jenny, Jenny's question is, do we know officially if Zenless will show pre-market? No, we don't know that officially. What I know is that NAR's rule allows for an MLS to send a feed like that would allow Zenless to do it. I think there's still some discretion at the MLS level. So at the end of the day, that's up to MIBOR. And then in theory, hopefully someday our MLS too. Okay, I think I got through theirs. I thought I saw one more, but I don't see it now. Okay. I think there's kind of an interesting moment in time, just in the general pre-market, off-market, and there's good debate happening about this. next week we'll look at our typical statewide data in comparison to Indy Metro, Evansville Metro, Lafayette Metro, and we look at inventory. And as inventory goes down, remember that stat that we look at once a month, which is how many of the sales are immediate? What percentage of the marketplace is a house that's selling in 3 days or less? Well, that percentage is going up. And in most of our markets, actually in all 3 of our markets, it's going up. And it's fairly high because inventory is low. And I know it's not necessarily ideal market conditions, but the reality is there's a lot of deals happening off market. And Megan and I have said this on this call. Look, let's just acknowledge it is what it is. There is pressure from both seller and buyer right now to be, as a realtor, to be in tune with pre-market, off-market activity, especially if you're working in, I believe still the best examples that we work in would be like West Lafayette, Zionsville, Meridian Kessler in Indianapolis. If you're working in one of those, but probably in other marketplaces too, you're going to get questions about this. And we want to equip you. We want you to be able to accommodate your client on either side of the deal. But particularly on the listing side, there's quite a bit of nuance to this right now. There's some black and white, and there's a whole lot of gray in terms of how you go about doing this. And what we would say is reach out to one of the two of us. Reach out to Megan, reach out to me, talk through what it is your seller's trying to accomplish. I think I mentioned this last week. One of our realtors, I won't name them, had asked me a question, and they said, gosh, I'm a little bit hesitant to ask Megan, not because I'm, not going to like her answer, but I don't want to put Megan into a weird position where I'm basically asking her if I can break a rule. And then Megan's like, in this, look, we're aware of the tension. We're aware of the weird spot that you're in. And I think you're going to find us to be pretty balanced and give you some advice. And in a lot of cases, I think there's probably a route even today that allows you to accomplish what your seller wants to accomplish without breaking any rules. Hopefully by September, likely quite a bit before then, both of our MLSs will have applied this multiple listing options for sellers rule from NAR, and that the market will be a lot more consistent and clear and provide you better options for sellers. So I know that's a lot of conversation. It's 10 till 10. I'm going to wrap this up, and I give you all permission to not think about this for the rest of your day. Go out and do some deals, sell some real estate like you've been doing. Thanks for joining. We'll see you all next Wednesday.